The radio crackled with static, then silence. General Morrison stared at the tactical display, watching red dots converge on the isolated forward operating base like blood drops spreading through water. 47 American soldiers trapped behind enemy lines, their extraction window closing faster than a coffin lid. The rescue helicopters had been shot down. The ground convoy was pinned by artillery. And somewhere in the thunderheads above Afghanistan's Kunar province, an A-10 Thunderbolt II was 3 hours overdue for check-in. "Sir, we've lost contact with Reaper 6, Lieutenant Collins reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The operations center fell into the kind of silence that precedes either miracles or memorials. Morrison's weathered hands gripped the edge of the communications console until his knuckles went white. He'd been making impossible decisions for 30 years, but this felt different. This felt final. The missing aircraft belonged to Captain Kai Phoenix Nakamura, and Morrison had personally signed the order grounding her just 6 months ago. Psychological evaluation pending, they'd called it. Too many close calls, too many risks taken for other people's lives. The psychiatrist had used words like survivor's guilt and self-destructive tendencies. What they hadn't understood was that Phoenix didn't just fly the A-10, she inhabited it, breathed with it, bled with it. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and more confirmed kills than any pilot in her squadron. Yet the brass saw only the daughter of a convenience store owner from Sacramento, a woman who'd clawed her way through flight school while enduring whispers about diversity quotas and lowered standards. They never saw the way she could thread her aircraft through mountain valleys at 200 feet, or how she could put 30mm rounds through a window without scratching the frame. Now, as Morrison stared at the storm system rolling across the tactical display, he faced a choice that would define the rest of his career. The stranded soldiers had maybe 90 minutes before being overrun. No other assets were available. The only aircraft still airborne in the sector was Phoenix's A-10, if she was even still alive. "General," Collins whispered, "what are your orders?" Morrison closed his eyes and remembered the last conversation he'd had with Phoenix. She'd stood at attention in his office, jaw set with the kind of determination that comes from having nothing left to lose. "Permission to return to flight status, sir." He denied that request. Looking back, he wondered if he'd been trying to save her life or end her career. The tactical display pulsed red. Somewhere out there, through layers of storm clouds and enemy fire, Phoenix was either coming home or she wasn't. Morrison reached for the radio, knowing that whatever happened next would echo through the mountains long after the thunder stopped. Thunder rolled across the Kunar Valley like the breath of sleeping giants, but Captain Kai Nakamura wasn't listening to the storm anymore. She was listening to her aircraft. The A-10's twin engines hummed their familiar song beneath her, a mechanical lullaby she'd learned to trust more than her own heartbeat. 3 hours ago, she disobeyed direct orders to return to base. 3 hours ago, she'd chosen 47 strangers over her own career. The Thunderbolt II carved through turbulence that would have shredded lesser aircraft, its titanium bathtub cockpit protecting her from everything except her own thoughts. Phoenix's hands moved across the controls with muscle memory earned through countless hours of flight time, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. It was back in a psychiatric evaluation room, listening to a doctor with soft hands and a softer voice explain why she wasn't fit for combat duty. "You exhibit signs of hypervigilance and an inability to prioritize your own survival," the psychiatrist had said, reading from a file thick with incident reports. "These tendencies, while admirable in their motivation, represent a clear danger to both yourself and your unit." What the doctor hadn't understood was that Phoenix had never learned to measure her own life against others. Growing up as the only child of parents who'd fled Hiroshima's aftermath, she'd inherited a bone-deep understanding that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant making sure the right people made it home. The radio in her helmet crackled. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch. Please respond." General Morrison's voice cut through the static, heavy with authority and something that might have been regret. She recognized the call sign. Overwatch was Morrison's personal channel, the one he used when official channels weren't enough. Phoenix's thumb hovered over the transmit button. She could respond, acknowledge his authority, and request permission to proceed with her unauthorized mission. Or she could maintain radio silence and let her actions speak for themselves. Through the A-10's reinforced canopy, she could see the storm system ahead. A wall of black clouds shot through with lightning that turned the afternoon sky purple. Below, somewhere in those mountains, soldiers were counting their ammunition and wondering if anyone was coming for them. Phoenix had studied their position on her tactical display until she'd memorized every ridge and valley. She knew their names now, had read their service records during the long flight from Bagram. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, 3 kids in Texas. Private First Class David Kim, just 19, engaged to his high school sweetheart. Captain Rachel Thompson, who'd volunteered for this mission because her team needed medical supplies. Morrison's voice came again, more insistent. "Phoenix, I know you're out there. Talk to me." Phoenix finally keyed her mic. "Overwatch, this is Phoenix." Her voice was calm, professional, giving away nothing of the storm building in her chest. "I'm tracking multiple heat signatures in grid Delta 7, American signatures." Phoenix's words hung in the radio static like a confession. Through her headset, she could hear the background noise of the operations center, keyboards clicking, voices murmuring tactical updates, the ever-present hum of electronics that kept wars running in the digital age. General Morrison's breathing was audible, measured, and heavy. "Phoenix, your current position puts you in violation of direct orders," Morrison said finally. His voice carried the weight of military protocol, but underneath it, Phoenix detected something else. Not anger, understanding, maybe, or resignation. "You were instructed to return to base for psychological evaluation." Phoenix banked the A-10 through a gap in the mountains, her eyes scanning the landscape below for signs of the trapped unit. The Thunderbolt II responded to her touch like an extension of her body, rolling smoothly through air currents that would have bucked a lighter aircraft into the ground. She'd been flying for 16 hours straight, but fatigue felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "Copy that, Overwatch. Orders received and acknowledged." Phoenix's response was textbook military precision, but she made no move to change course. Below, the terrain shifted from barren peaks to scattered vegetation, and somewhere in that maze of ridges and valleys, American soldiers were running out of time. The radio stayed quiet for long seconds. Phoenix could imagine Morrison in the operations center, surrounded by staff officers and communication specialists, all of them watching him wrestle with a decision that had no clean answers. She'd put him in an impossible position: court-martial a pilot for saving American lives, or validate insubordination that could ripple through the entire chain of command. "Phoenix," Morrison's voice returned, quieter now, almost conversational. "Tell me what you see out there." Phoenix smiled grimly inside her helmet. Morrison was giving her an opening, a way to frame her mission in terms of tactical necessity rather than insubordination. She'd always respected him for that, his ability to find paths through problems that seemed unsolvable. "I see a storm system moving in from the northwest, 40-knot winds, lightning activity increasing," Phoenix reported, her voice steady despite the turbulence shaking her aircraft. "I see terrain that's going to make helicopter extraction impossible within the next 2 hours, and I see American soldiers who need someone to even the odds." Through her canopy, lightning illuminated the mountains in stark black and white, revealing ridgelines that looked like broken teeth. The A-10 shuddered through another pocket of turbulence, but Phoenix held her course steady. She'd flown through worse storms, fought through worse odds. Morrison's voice came back one more time, quieter than before. "Phoenix, what's your fuel status?" Phoenix glanced at her instruments. The numbers weren't encouraging, but they were workable. "Sufficient for mission completion, sir." The silence that followed, told her everything she needed to know. General Morrison stood in the operations center, surrounded by screens showing weather patterns, enemy positions, and fuel calculations that painted increasingly grim pictures. Lieutenant Collins hovered nearby, tablet in hand, ready to relay whatever orders Morrison decided to give. But Morrison wasn't thinking about orders anymore. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had with Phoenix's squadron commander 6 months ago. "She's our best pilot," Major Patterson had insisted, packing Morrison's office like a caged animal. "The troops love her because she brings them home. Every single time, General, that has to count for something." Morrison had reviewed Phoenix's file afterward, reading through incident reports that told the story of a pilot who consistently pushed boundaries in service of ground forces. The time she'd stayed on station for 3 hours past fuel minimums to provide cover for a medical evacuation. The mission where she'd made 17 attack runs on a Taliban position despite taking heavy ground fire. The rescue operation where she'd landed her A-10 on a highway to extract wounded Marines. Each incident had resulted in successful missions and saved American lives. Each incident had also violated established safety protocols and operational guidelines. The military needed both pilots who followed orders and pilots who knew when to break them. The trick was knowing which was which. "Sir," Collins prompted quietly, "Phoenix is requesting clearance to proceed to Grid Delta 7. Morrison looked at the tactical display. The storm system was moving faster than predicted, and the enemy forces surrounding the trapped unit were tightening their noose. In 30 minutes, maybe less, the Americans on the ground would be overrun. No helicopter could fly in those conditions. No ground convoy could reach them in time. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch," Morrison said into his headset. "You are cleared to proceed. Weapons free. Bring our people home." Phoenix's voice came back immediately, professional but carrying a note of something that might have been gratitude. "Roger that, Overwatch. Phoenix is inbound." Morrison watched the single blue dot representing Phoenix's aircraft move across the tactical display toward the cluster of red enemy positions. Around him, the operations center had gone quiet. Every technician, every officer, every analyst was focused on that blue dot threading its way through hostile territory. Collins leaned closer to Morrison's shoulder. "General, what do I log in the official record?" Morrison considered the question. In a few hours, there would be after-action reports to file, investigations to conduct, careers to evaluate. But right now, there was only Phoenix and her A-10, flying through a storm to reach soldiers who needed her. "Log it as a tactical adjustment based on changing battlefield conditions," Morrison said. "And Lieutenant, make sure our communications are recorded, all of them." Collins nodded and returned to his station. Morrison kept his eyes on the tactical display, watching Phoenix disappear into the storm system. In his 30 years of military service, he'd made thousands of decisions. This one felt different. This one felt right. Phoenix dropped the A-10 to 300 feet, skimming mountain ridges with the kind of precision that separated experienced pilots from dead ones. The Thunderbolt II's engines roared their approval, twin turbofans designed for exactly this kind of low-altitude work. Through her canopy, the landscape blurred past in shades of brown and gray, broken occasionally by patches of green, where streams carved their way through the stone. The GPS coordinates for the trapped unit burned bright on her tactical display, Grid Delta 7, a cluster of buildings at the convergence of 3 valleys that made for excellent defensive positions and terrible extraction points. Phoenix had studied the satellite imagery during her flight from Bagram, memorizing every structure, every potential firing position, every piece of cover that might keep 47 Americans alive until she arrived. "Wolverine 6, this is Phoenix," she called over the radio, using the call sign for the unit commander. "I'm inbound to your position, estimate 5 minutes. Request tactical update." The response came back immediately, tight with stress but professionally controlled. Phoenix, this is Wolverine 6. We've got approximately 200 enemy fighters in the surrounding hills, mortars and small arms fire increasing. We've taken 14 casualties, 6 KIA. Medical supplies are critical. Captain Rachel Thompson's voice carried the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting a losing battle with dignity intact. Phoenix had read Thompson's file during the flight, West Point graduate, Bronze Star with V device, the kind of officer who led from the front and brought her people home, the kind of officer who deserved someone willing to break rules to reach her. Copy Wolverine 6. Can you mark your position with smoke? Negative, Phoenix. We're conserving smoke grenades for final extraction. But we've got orange panels on the roof of the largest building, northwest corner of the compound. Phoenix adjusted her approach, studying the terrain through her targeting system. The compound sat in a natural bowl surrounded by hills that provided excellent overlapping fields of fire for anyone wanting to keep people trapped inside. Standard tactics would call for multiple aircraft working in coordination, maybe some artillery support to suppress enemy positions before beginning attack runs. Phoenix was one aircraft with limited ammunition and fuel that was burning faster than she liked. Standard tactics weren't going to work. She pulled up her weapons menu, reviewing her options. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon carried 1,174 rounds of 30 ammunition, enough to make a serious impression on enemy positions if she placed her shots carefully. She also carried 4 AGM-65 Maverick missiles and 2 500-pound bombs, precision weapons that could eliminate specific threats without endangering friendly forces. Wolverine 6, I'm beginning my attack run. Stay low and keep your people away from windows. Phoenix pushed the A-10 into a shallow dive, lining up her first pass on the largest concentration of enemy fighters. The A-10's cannon spoke with a voice like tearing canvas, each burst sending streams of depleted uranium shells into enemy positions with surgical precision. Phoenix pulled out of her first attack run and immediately rolled into a banking turn for her second pass, ignoring the tracers that followed her across the sky like angry fireflies. Below, the battlefield transformed under her attention. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently on the American position suddenly found themselves diving for cover as 30 rounds chewed through their positions. Phoenix's targeting system highlighted muzzle flashes and movement, feeding her information faster than conscious thought could process. Wolverine 6, this is Phoenix. I've got eyes on your position. Enemy mortars are set up on the ridgeline to your northeast, approximately 800 meters. I'm going to silence them. Phoenix rolled the Thunderbolt II into another attack run, this time lining up one of her Maverick missiles on the mortar position. The weapon streaked away from her aircraft with a trail of white smoke, impacting exactly where her targeting system had predicted. The explosion echoed through the mountains, and the incoming mortar fire stopped. Phoenix, this is Wolverine 6. That was beautiful shooting. Enemy pressure is decreasing on our eastern perimeter. But Phoenix wasn't listening to the praise. She was already scanning for her next target, her eyes moving between her tactical display and the terrain below. The enemy fighters were adapting to her presence, spreading out and using cover more effectively. She needed to end this quickly before they organized a coordinated response. Her radio crackled with a new voice. Phoenix, this is Wolverine 7. We've got wounded who need immediate medical attention. Can you clear a landing zone? Phoenix's heart sank. Landing zones meant helicopters, and helicopters couldn't fly in the storm system that was approaching from the northwest. She could see the wall of black clouds advancing across the mountains, lightning flickering in its depths like trapped electricity. Wolverine 7, negative on helicopter extraction. Weather's moving in too fast. We need to find another way. She banked the A-10 around for another pass, studying the compound below. The buildings were constructed of concrete and stone, built to withstand the kind of fighting that had become routine in Afghanistan. But they also formed a natural defensive position that could hold off enemy forces if the defenders had enough ammunition and medical supplies. Phoenix made a decision that would have horrified her flight instructors. She pulled the A-10 into a steep climb, gaining altitude for what pilots called a danger close, attack run, weapons deployed within lethal range of friendly forces. The mountains fell away beneath her, and for a moment, Phoenix felt the familiar peace that came with flying above the chaos of ground combat. Up here, surrounded by clouds and sky, the world made sense. Up here, she was exactly who she was supposed to be. Then she pushed the nose down and dove back into the fight. Lightning illuminated Phoenix's canopy as she rolled into her fourth attack run, the A-10's engine screaming through air thick with storm clouds and gun smoke. Her ammunition counter showed she was down to her last 200 rounds of 30, and fuel was becoming a serious concern. But the enemy forces surrounding the American position were finally beginning to break. "Phoenix, this is Wolverine 6. Enemy fighters are pulling back from our perimeter. Whatever you're doing up there, it's working." Phoenix smiled grimly inside her helmet. The A-10 had been designed for exactly this kind of close air support mission, staying on station for extended periods, providing sustained firepower in support of ground forces. But even the Thunderbolt II had limits, and she was approaching hers. Her targeting system highlighted movement on a ridgeline to the south, enemy fighters attempting to flank the American position while her attention was focused elsewhere. Phoenix adjusted her approach, lining up her final Maverick missile on their position. "Wolverine 6, be advised, I'm engaging targets to your south. Keep your people clear of that ridgeline." The missile streaked away from her aircraft, impacting in a cascade of rock and flame that sent enemy fighters scattering for cover. Phoenix followed up with a burst from her cannon, the depleted uranium rounds carving through stone and earth with devastating effectiveness. But as she pulled out of the attack run, her threat warning system began screaming. Someone on the ground had acquired her with a surface-to-air missile system, probably a shoulder-fired weapon, but deadly enough to bring down an A-10 if it found its mark. Phoenix threw the Thunderbolt II into evasive maneuvers, rolling and diving through the mountain valleys with the kind of desperation that came from having missiles hunting her. She could see the smoke trail in her peripheral vision, a white line racing across the sky toward her aircraft. The missile missed by less than 50 feet, exploding in a fireball that shook her aircraft and filled her cockpit with the acrid smell of cordite. Phoenix's hands moved across her controls, checking systems and looking for damage. Everything appeared functional, but she'd used up most of her luck along with her ammunition. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch." General Morrison's voice cut through the chaos, calm and professional. "What's your status?" Phoenix checked her instruments again. Fuel was critical, ammunition was nearly exhausted, and the storm system was less than 30 minutes from her position. But the enemy forces around the American compound had been scattered or destroyed, buying the defenders time they desperately needed. "Overwatch, this is Phoenix. Mission successful. Enemy forces neutralized. But I'm not going to make it back to base." The silence that followed her transmission lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Phoenix could imagine Morrison in the operations center, staring at fuel calculations and weather reports that confirmed what she already knew. The A-10 was a tough aircraft, but it couldn't fly on empty tanks. Morrison's voice returned, quiet but steady. "Phoenix, there's a forward operating base at Grid Echo 2, approximately 40 miles northwest of your position. They've got fuel and maintenance facilities." Phoenix pulled up her navigation display. Grid Echo 2 was at the edge of her fuel range, and it meant flying directly into the approaching storm system. But it was better than trying to dead-stick land an A-10 in the mountains. "Roger, Overwatch. Phoenix's RTB to Grid Echo 2." She turned the Thunderbolt II northwest, climbing into clouds that seemed to swallow her aircraft whole. Behind her, 47 American soldiers watched her navigation lights disappear into the storm, knowing they owed their lives to a pilot who'd broken every rule to reach them. The forward operating base at Grid Echo 2 looked like a postcard from hell, a collection of concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and aircraft revetments carved into a mountain valley that caught every bit of wind, and whether the Hindu Kush could deliver. Phoenix's fuel gauge showed red as she entered the traffic pattern, her engines drinking the last drops of JP-8 with mechanical thirst. Through her canopy, she could see ground crews scrambling to clear the runway. Word of her mission had preceded her arrival, and everyone on the base understood they were about to host a pilot who just made military aviation history. Phoenix tried not to think about the investigations and debriefings that would follow. Right now, she just needed to get her aircraft on the ground in one piece. Phoenix, this is Echo 2 Tower. Runway is clear. Winds are gusting to 40 knots from the northwest. You're cleared for immediate landing. The A-10 fought her through the approach, buffeted by winds that seemed determined to smash her into the surrounding mountains. Phoenix's hands worked the controls with practiced precision, making tiny adjustments that kept her aircraft aligned with the runway despite the storm trying to kill her. The Thunderbolt II had been designed to operate from rough airstrips in terrible weather, and today it was earning its reputation. Her wheels touched concrete with a screech of rubber and a bounce that rattled her teeth. Phoenix applied brakes and reverse thrust, bringing the A-10 to a stop with less than 1,000 feet of runway to spare. Her engines wound down with mechanical sighs, and for the first time in 6 hours, the cockpit went quiet. Phoenix sat in her ejection seat for long moments, hands still gripping the control stick, breathing air that tasted like sweat and adrenaline. Through her canopy, she could see ground crews approaching with fuel trucks and maintenance equipment. Soon, there would be debriefings and phone calls and paperwork. But right now, there was just silence and the knowledge that 47 American soldiers would be going home to their families. Her radio crackled one final time. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch." Morrison's voice carried across the static, steady and sure. "Outstanding work out there. Outstanding." Phoenix keyed her mic for the last time that day. "Just doing my job, sir." But even as she said it, Phoenix knew it wasn't true. Today, she'd done more than her job. Today, she'd done what was necessary. Rules and regulations and career consequences be damned. Today, she'd remembered why she'd learned to fly in the first place. She popped her canopy and breathed mountain air that tasted like freedom and redemption. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, 47 Americans were alive because she'd chosen to disobey orders and trust her instincts instead. Phoenix climbed down from her aircraft and walked toward the operations building, her flight suit dark with sweat, her helmet tucked under her arm. Behind her, ground crews swarmed over the A-10, checking for battle damage and preparing it for the flight home. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The Thunderbolt II had done its job, and so had she. The debriefing room at Echo 2 smelled like coffee and diesel fuel, its walls covered with maps of Afghanistan that looked like abstract art painted in shades of brown and green. Phoenix sat across from Major Harrison, the base commander, while a digital recorder captured every word of their conversation. 3 days had passed since her unauthorized rescue mission, 3 days of interviews and investigations that had attracted attention from as high as the Pentagon. Major Harrison was younger than Phoenix had expected, probably fast-tracked through the ranks by combat deployments and staff assignments. He handled the debriefing with professional courtesy, but Phoenix could see questions in his eyes that went beyond tactical procedures and rules of engagement. "Captain Nakamura, let's go through your decision-making process one more time," Harrison said, consulting his tablet. "At what point did you determine that disobeying direct orders was the appropriate course of action?" Phoenix had answered this question in various forms dozens of times over the past 3 days. Each interviewer had phrased it differently, but they all wanted to understand the same thing: how a pilot with an exemplary record had suddenly decided that her judgment superseded established command authority. "Sir, I had intelligence indicating American forces were in immediate danger," Phoenix replied, using the same language she'd employed in every previous debriefing. Tactical conditions suggested that conventional rescue assets would be ineffective. I made a battlefield decision to engage. Harrison nodded, making notes on his tablet. "And you understood that this decision violated explicit orders from General Morrison to return to base for psychological evaluation." Phoenix felt the familiar knot of tension in her stomach. The psychological evaluation had been the brass's way of removing her from active duty without formally grounding her. Too many close calls, they'd said. Too many risks taken for other people's lives, as if caring about the troops you were supposed to protect had become a liability. "I understood the orders, sir. I also understood that 47 Americans were going to die if someone didn't act." Harrison set down his tablet and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in the interview, his expression softened slightly. "Captain, I've read your service record. 3 combat tour, 2 distinguished flying crosses, more close air support missions than any pilot in your squadron. You've saved a lot of lives over the past 5 years." Phoenix waited for the "but" that was surely coming. "But this incident has created problems that go beyond your individual situation. We have pilots throughout the theater who are wondering if they should start making their own tactical decisions based on their personal assessment of battlefield conditions. Command authority only works if orders are followed." Phoenix understood the dilemma. The military was built on a foundation of disciplined obedience to lawful orders. If every pilot started deciding which orders to follow and which to ignore, the entire command structure would collapse. But understanding the problem didn't make her regret her decision. "Sir, respectfully, those 47 soldiers are alive because I made the right choice. I'd make the same choice again." Harrison studied her for long moments, as if trying to decode something written in her expression. "Captain, what do you think should happen next?" Phoenix had been expecting this question, but she still didn't have a good answer. "That's above my pay grade, sir. I follow orders and I fly missions. Everything else is for people with more rank than me to decide." Harrison smiled at that, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him during the entire debriefing. "Captain Nakamura, I think you're about to discover that some decisions can't be made by people with more rank. Some decisions can only be made by the person in the cockpit." 2 weeks later, Phoenix found herself back in General Morrison's office, standing at attention while he reviewed a stack of documents that would determine the rest of her military career. The office looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago, but everything else had changed. The rescue mission at Grid Delta 7 had made national news, turning Phoenix into a reluctant symbol of military heroism and individual initiative. Morrison looked up from the papers, his expression unreadable. "Captain Nakamura, you've created quite a stir in Washington. The Joint Chiefs are debating new policies for close air support operations. Congress is asking questions about command authority in combat zones, and the media is calling you the Angel of Afghanistan." Phoenix suppressed a wince at the nickname. The media attention had been overwhelming: interviews, photo shoots, speaking requests that her public affairs officer had to manage like a full-time job. Everyone wanted to hear from the female pilot who'd saved 47 American lives by breaking the rules. "Sir, I never intended to create controversy. I just wanted to bring our people home." Morrison stood and walked to his window, looking out at the flight line where A-10 sat in neat rows like sleeping predators. "Captain, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you believe you were right to disobey my orders?" Phoenix considered the question carefully. Military officers were trained to analyze their decisions objectively, to learn from mistakes and apply those lessons to future situations. But some decisions went beyond tactical analysis. Some decisions came from a place deeper than training or protocol. Yes, sir, I believe I was right. Morrison turned back to face her, and Phoenix was surprised to see what might have been approval in his expression. So do I, Captain. So does the Secretary of Defense. So does the President of the United States. Morrison returned to his desk and picked up one of the documents. Captain Nakamura, you're being promoted to Major, effective immediately. You're also being assigned as the new commander of the 442nd Fighter Squadron, with responsibility for training the next generation of A-10 pilots. Phoenix felt her world tilt sideways. She'd expected a court-martial, maybe a reduction in rank or administrative discharge. She hadn't expected promotion and command assignment. Sir, I don't understand. Morrison smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. Captain, Major Nakamura, the military needs leaders who understand that following orders and doing the right thing aren't always the same thing. We need officers who can make impossible decisions under impossible circumstances. We need people like you. Morrison handed her the promotion orders, along with a small box containing golden oak leaves. Your new squadron reports to you next week. They're going to be lucky to have you. Phoenix accepted the orders and the insignia, her hands steady despite the chaos in her head. Sir, what about the psychological evaluation? Morrison's smile widened. Dr. Richards has revised his assessment. Apparently, risking your career to save American lives is now considered psychologically healthy. Who would have thought? As Phoenix left Morrison's office, she caught sight of herself in the reflection of his window. The woman looking back at her wore the same uniform, the same wings, the same determination. But something had changed in the past few weeks, something fundamental about how she saw herself and her place in the military. She was no longer the pilot who flew under the radar, avoiding attention and controversy. She was Phoenix, the officer who'd flown through a storm to save 47 Americans, and who'd do it again without hesitation. Major Phoenix Nakamura walked across the flight line toward her new squadron's hangar, her promotion orders tucked securely in her flight suit pocket. The A-10s around her seemed to nod approval as she passed, their shark-tooth grins painted on gray noses that had seen combat in deserts and mountains around the world. Tomorrow, she'd start training the next generation of Thunderbolt II pilots. Tomorrow, she'd begin teaching them that sometimes the most important decision a pilot could make was knowing when to break the rules. But today, she just wanted to fly. Phoenix climbed into the cockpit of an A-10, strapped herself into the ejection seat, and began her pre-flight checklist. The familiar ritual of switches and gauges felt like coming home. As she started the engines, their twin roars filled the mountain air with mechanical music that spoke of power and purpose. She taxied toward the active runway, cleared for takeoff into an Afghan sky that stretched endlessly blue above the Hindu Kush Mountains. The control tower wished her safe flight, and Phoenix acknowledged with her call sign, the name that had become legend and would outlive them all. Phoenix is airborne. The A-10 climbed into the afternoon sky, carrying with it a pilot who'd learned that the most important battles weren't always fought with weapons and tactics. Sometimes they were fought with conscience and courage, with the willingness to risk everything for people who counted on you to bring them home. As Phoenix leveled off at cruise altitude, she could see the mountains spread out below her like a wrinkled map of human conflict and divine indifference. Somewhere down there, 47 American soldiers were going about their daily routines, writing letters home, cleaning weapons, counting days until rotation. They were alive because she'd chosen conscience over compliance, because she'd understood that some orders were meant to be broken. The radio crackled with routine traffic, other pilots checking in, controllers managing airspace, the constant chatter that kept military aviation functioning. Phoenix listened with half her attention while the other half focused on the pure joy of flight, the freedom that came with being alone in an endless sky. Her call sign had become more than just a radio identifier. It had become a symbol of what the military could be at its best: professional, competent, but never forgetting that behind every tactical decision were human lives that mattered more than careers or regulations. Phoenix banked the A-10 toward the setting sun, its cockpit canopy reflecting gold light across mountain peaks that had witnessed centuries of conflict and would witness centuries more. But today, at least, some American soldiers would make it home to their families. Today, the rules had been broken for all the right reasons. In the operations center at Bagram Air Base, General Morrison watched Phoenix's aircraft track across his tactical display, a blue dot moving steadily through controlled airspace toward whatever mission awaited her next. He'd made a lot of decisions in his 30-year career, but recommending Phoenix for promotion and command had been one of his easiest. The military needed leaders who understood that courage wasn't just about facing enemy fire. Sometimes it was about facing your own chain of command and saying no. Sometimes it was about risking everything you'd worked for because people were counting on you to do the right thing. Morrison turned away from the tactical display and walked toward his office, where other decisions waited to be made. Other lives hung in the balance of tactical assessments and operational requirements. But for now, at least, he could take satisfaction in knowing that Phoenix was back where she belonged, in the cockpit of an A-10, ready to bring American soldiers home. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful in any other context. In Afghanistan, they were just another day ending, another night beginning, another rotation of the eternal cycle that turned soldiers into veterans and heroes into legends. Phoenix flew toward whatever waited ahead, her aircraft steady and sure beneath her hands, her call sign echoing through radio frequencies that connected pilots across continents and cultures. She'd found her place in the world, found her purpose, found her peace. And in the end, that was worth more than any medal or promotion or newspaper headline. That was worth everything. The story of Phoenix and Grid Delta 7 became part of military folklore, passed down through generations of pilots in ready rooms and flight schools around the world. The details changed with each telling: the number of enemy fighters, the weather conditions, the amount of fuel remaining, but the core remained constant. A pilot had disobeyed orders to save American lives, and she'd been right to do it. Phoenix herself rarely spoke about that day. She'd moved on to other assignments, other challenges, other opportunities to serve. She commanded squadrons, trained younger pilots, eventually retired with full